The engine of the luxury sedan hummed a low, anxious note, a sound that seemed entirely out of place amidst the towering silence of the Wyoming wilderness. Elara gripped the leather steering wheel until her knuckles turned white, her eyes darting between the frozen windshield and the glowing screen of her GPS. The device had been her lifeline, her connection to the organized, predictable world she left behind in Chicago. But now, the screen flickered, the blue line of the route spinning aimlessly in a digital void. Outside, the world was vanishing. What had started as a light dusting of powder had transformed into a curtain of white, a relentless blizzard that erased the horizon and merged the sky with the earth. Elara felt a cold knot of fear tighten in her stomach. She checked her phone again. No service. She was supposed to be at a lodge in Jackson Hole by now, reviewing blueprints for a new eco-resort. It was the project that would define her career, the one that would finally prove to the partners at the firm that she was ready for the top tier. But a shortcut suggested by her navigation system had led her onto this winding, unpaved road that was quickly disappearing under inches of fresh snow. The car slipped. It was a subtle movement at first, a loss of traction that sent a shudder through the chassis. Elara tapped the brakes, a reflex from city driving, but it was the wrong move. The sedan fishtailed, sliding sideways with a terrifying grace. The world outside spun white snow, dark pine trees, white snow again, tilled with a sickening crunch. The car slid off the shoulder and came to a halt in a deep drift. Silence rushed back in, heavier than before. The engine sputtered and died. Elara sat frozen, her breath coming in shallow clouds in the cooling air. She tried the ignition. Nothing but a hollow click. She pushed the door open against the weight of the wind, stepping out into a world that felt vast, indifferent, and dangerously cold. Her stylish boots, designed for plowed sidewalks, sank immediately into the freezing powder. "Hello," she called out, her voice snatched away instantly by the wind. There was no answer, only the mournful howl of the gale tearing through the pine needles. She wrapped her coat tighter, realizing with terrifying clarity that she was not just lost. She was in danger. She looked around, squinting against the stinging ice crystals. In the distance, barely visible through the swirling white, she saw a flicker. A light. It was faint, like a dying star, but it was there. Without thinking, she began to walk toward it. Every step was a battle. The snow clung to her legs, heavy and wet. The cold bit through her expensive coat, seeking the warmth of her skin. She didn't know how long she walked, maybe 10 minutes, maybe an hour, but just as her legs began to fail, a dark shape emerged from the storm. It wasn't a building, it was a horse. A massive, dark beast standing stoic against the wind, its mane whipped by the gale. Blah! And atop the horse sat a figure. He looked like part of the landscape itself, wrapped in a heavy canvas duster, a wide-brimmed hat pulled low over his eyes. He didn't look surprised to see her, just looked steady. "You're a long way from the highway, ma'am." His voice was deep, rumbling like distant thunder, cutting through the wind with ease. Elara looked up at him, shivering so violently she could barely speak. "My car. I crashed," she stammered, her teeth chattering. The cowboy swung down from the saddle in one fluid motion. He was tall, towering over her, but his presence wasn't threatening. It was an anchor in the storm. He didn't ask questions. He didn't lecture her about the weather or her choice of vehicle. Simply unbuttoned his heavy coat, revealing a thick wool flannel shirt underneath, and wrapped the canvas duster around her shaking shoulders. It smelled of wood smoke, leather, and horse's scent, so earthy and real it made her dizzy. "Name's Caleb," he said, lifting her easily, as if she weighed nothing, and placing her on the saddle. "I'm Elara," she managed to whisper. He swung up behind her, his arms coming around her to grab the reins, creating a cage of warmth against the biting cold. "Hold on, Elara. We're almost home." The horse turned, trudging powerfully through the drifts. Elara leaned back against his chest, her eyes closing as the exhaustion overtook her fear. She was safe. They arrived at a cabin built of rough-hewn logs, smoke pouring from a stone chimney. Caleb carried her inside, kicking the door shut against the blizzard. The transition was instant from the screaming wind to a quiet, crackling warmth. The interior was simple. A large stone fireplace dominated one wall, a worn leather armchair sat before it, and shelves lined with books and tools covered the rest. Caleb set her down in the armchair and immediately went to the fire, adding logs until the flames roared to life. "You need to get warm," he said, moving to a small kitchen area. "I'll make coffee, strong coffee." Elara sat shivering, looking around. There was no television, no computer, no blinking lights of a router, just wood, stone, and the man moving with efficient, quiet grace in the corner. "Thank you," she said, her voice finally returning. I have to call my office. I have a meeting tomorrow." Caleb paused, holding a kettle. He turned to look at her, his eyes the color of slate, unreadable but not unkind. "Phone lines are down from the storm. Cell towers don't reach this valley even on a sunny day. You're not calling anyone tonight, Elara." The reality hit her. She was trapped, but ... How long? She asked, panic flaring again. Caleb poured the boiling water, the steam rising around his face. "Storm's supposed to last 2 days. Drifts will take another 2 to clear. You're here for a bit." He walked over and handed her a ceramic mug. The heat from the cup seeped into her frozen hands. "I can't stay here for 4 days," she said, though the protest sounded weak even to her own ears. "I have deadlines. I have a life." Caleb took a sip of his own coffee, leaning against the heavy oak mantel of the fireplace. Really looked at her in a way men in the city never did. They looked through her, or at her resume, or at her appearance. Caleb looked at her. "Out here," he said softly, "the storm decides the schedule. Not you, not me. Best make peace with it." And for the first time in years, Elara realized she had no control. The thought was terrifying. But as she watched the firelight dance in Caleb's eyes, she wondered if maybe, just maybe, losing control was exactly what she needed. The first morning broke with a silence so profound it woke Elara from a deep, dreamless sleep. Morning meant the sound of garbage trucks, sirens, and the buzzing of her alarm. Here there was nothing. She opened her eyes, disoriented for a moment by the rough timber beams of the ceiling. The memory of the storm rushed back. She sat up, wrapping the heavy quilt around her. She was on a simple bed in the corner of the main room. Caleb was nowhere to be seen, but the fire was banked and glowing warm, and a cast-iron pot sat on the stove. She swung her legs out of bed. She was still wearing her thermal leggings and a sweater Caleb had lent her, huge and smelling of cedar. She padded across the wooden floorboards to the window. The world was white, pure, blinding white. The snow had piled halfway up the window pane. Beyond the glass, the ranch stretched out a barn with a snow-heavy roof, fences that looked like ink lines on paper, and the mountains now glistening under a piercing blue sky. It was beautiful in a way that hurt to look at. The front door opened with a rush of cold air. Caleb stomped his boots on the mat, carrying an armful of firewood. His cheeks were red from the cold, his breath pluming in the air. "Morning," he said, his voice rough with sleep or disuse. He dumped the wood by the hearth. Coffee's hot. Oatmeal's on the stove. "Where were you?" Elara asked, pulling the sweater tighter. "Checking the herd," he replied, dusting snow off his shoulders. "I had to make sure the calves were warm enough. Lost one last year in a storm like this. Don't intend to lose another." He looked at her, his gaze lingering on the oversized sweater. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched the corner of his mouth. "Fits you better than it fits me." Elara felt a flush rise to her cheeks that had nothing to do with the fire. "I need to pay you back," she said quickly, her city instincts kicking in, "for the rescue, the lodging. I can write you a check as soon as I get my bag from the car." Caleb stopped moving. He turned slowly, his expression hardening just a fraction. "I didn't pull you out of a snowbank for money, Elara," he said, his voice dropping an octave. "And I don't share my fire for a check." The rebuke was gentle, but it stung. Elara realized she had insulted him. In her world, everything was a transaction. Services were rendered, payment was made. The currency was different. "I'm sorry," she said, stepping closer to the fire. I don't know how to be useless. I need to do something." Caleb studied her for a moment. He saw the tension in her shoulders, the way her hands couldn't stop moving. He nodded toward the kitchen. "Can you cook?" I order out mostly," she admitted, "but I can chop things." Caleb chuckled, a low, warm sound that seemed to vibrate in the small cabin. "All right, then. Stew needs potatoes, knives in the drawer." And so the rhythm began. The next 2 days the cabin became their entire world. The culture clash was immediate. Elara moved fast, talked fast, and worried constantly. Caleb moved slow, spoke rarely, and seemed to worry about nothing except the immediate needs of the ranch. When she paced the floor, anxious about her missed emails, he would simply point to the window. "Look at the hawk," he would say. "See how he waits?" Slowly, the isolation began to wear down her defenses. On the second afternoon, the sun was warm enough to melt the ice on the porch. Caleb invited her to the barn. She hesitated, looking at her ruined boots, but followed him anyway. The barn was a cathedral of shadows and golden light, smelling of sweet hay and animals. He introduced her to the horses. "This is Bess," he said, stroking the nose of a roan mare. "And this is Jasper." He guided Elara's hand to the horse's neck. "Don't just pat him, feel him. Animals know when you're distracted." Elara closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. She felt the coarse hair, the warmth of the muscle beneath, the slow, steady beat of the animal's heart. "You're always running, Elara," Caleb said softly from beside her. He was close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from him. Even when you're standing still, your mind is 10 miles down the road. You miss the life happening right in front of you. She opened her eyes and looked up at him. "I have to run," she whispered. "If I stop, I fall behind." Caleb shook his head slowly. "If you never stop, you never arrive." He reached out, his rough, calloused hand brushing a stray lock of hair from her face. The touch was electric, shocking in its tenderness. Elara stopped breathing. The moment hung suspended in the dust motes dancing in the light. She wanted to lean into him. She wanted to bury her face in that flannel shirt and forget about blueprints and deadlines. But she was Elara Vance, rising star of Chicago architecture. She wasn't a rancher's wife. She stepped back, breaking the spell. Caleb's hand dropped to his side, his face impassive again, but his eyes burned. "I should check the water troughs," he said gruffly, turning away. Elara watched him go, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She was falling. She was falling for a man who lived in a different century, and she was terrified. By the fourth day, the plows had come through the main road. The sound of a diesel engine in the distance was the first intrusion of the outside world. Caleb heard it first. It was chopping wood outside, the axe rising and falling with hypnotic regularity. Stopped axe resting on the block and looked toward the valley entrance. Elara came out to the porch, holding 2 mugs of coffee. "Is that?" She started. "Tow truck," Caleb said flatly. "And likely a ranger to check the roads." The relief Elara expected to feel didn't come. Instead, a heavy stone settled in her chest. It was over. Within an hour, her car was winched out of the ditch. It was drivable, barely. The ranger, a friendly man named Miller, chatted loudly about the snowfall records, breaking the sacred silence she had grown used to. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. Once, twice, then a barrage of notifications. Ding, ding, ding. The sound was shrill and violent. She looked at the screen. 34 emails, 12 voicemails. Her boss furious, her assistant panicked. The city was clawing her back. She looked up at Caleb. He was standing by the gate, his hands jammed into his pockets, watching the ranger work. He looked like a stranger again. The intimacy of the cabin, the shared meals, the quiet evenings by the fire, it all felt like a dream dissipating in the daylight. She walked over to him. "Caleb," she said. He didn't look at her at first. He kept his eyes on the horizon. "Roads are clear," he said. "You'll make Jackson by noon if you leave now." It was a dismissal. He was making it easy for her to leave, protecting his own pride. "I thank you," she said, struggling to find the words, "for saving me, for everything." Caleb finally turned. His eyes searched hers, looking for something, a sign, a reason to ask her to stay. But Elara held her phone tight in her hand, the symbol of her other life. "You take care, Elara," he said. He didn't touch her. He didn't hug her. He just tipped his hat, a gesture of old-fashioned politeness that felt like a wall being built between them. "Drive slow, I will," she whispered. She got into her car. The leather seat felt cold and artificial. The engine started with a smooth purr. As she drove away, she looked in the rearview mirror. Caleb was still standing at the gate, a solitary dark figure against the endless white snow. He didn't wave. He just watched until she turned the corner and vanished. The drive to Jackson Hole was a blur. The meeting went perfectly. The partners were impressed. She got the contract. She returned to Chicago a hero, but the city felt different. The skyscrapers, which used to look like monuments to human achievement, now looked like cages. The noise of the traffic was a constant headache. Air smelled of exhaust and garbage, not pine and snow. Weeks turned into a month. Elara went through the motions. She drew lines, attended galas, and drank expensive wine. But every night, she lay in her penthouse apartment, staring at the ceiling, and all she could hear was the wind in the trees. All she could feel was the phantom touch of a rough hand on her cheek. She was successful, she was wealthy, and she was profoundly, achingly lonely. She tried to date a lawyer named Greg. He was handsome, successful, and talked endlessly about the stock market. At dinner one night, he complained about the waiter being too slow. Elara looked at his manicured hands and thought of Caleb's scarred knuckles. She thought of how Caleb waited for the hawk. She stood up, tossing her napkin on the table. "I have to go," she said. "Go? Go where?" Greg asked, confused. "Home," she said. But she didn't mean her apartment. The drive back to Wyoming was different. She wasn't rushing. She wasn't following a GPS blindly. She watched the landscape change from the flatlands to the rolling hills, and finally to the jagged teeth of the Rockies. It was spring now. Snow was retreating to the highest peaks, leaving behind a world exploding with green. She didn't tell anyone she was coming. She just drove. When she turned onto the dirt road leading to Caleb's ranch, her heart was hammering in her throat. What if he had moved on? What if he was angry? What if the magic was only because of the storm? She pulled up to the cabin. It looked the same, anchored to the earth. The corral was empty, but she saw a figure in the distance, fixing a fence line near the creek. She parked the car and walked. The mud sucked at her boots this time, practical work boots she had bought at a supply store in Cheyenne. Caleb was wrestling with a spool of barbed wire. He was shirtless, the spring sun beating down on his back, his muscles straining as he pulled the wire taut. He didn't hear her approach over the sound of the rushing creek. Elara stopped 10 feet away, just watching him. He was real. He wasn't a memory. "Need a hand with that?" she called out. Caleb froze. He dropped the wire and spun around. His face was a mask of shock, stared at her as if she were a ghost. "Elara?" he breathed. "I learned how to be useful," she said, a nervous smile playing on her lips. "I can't fix a fence yet, but I can hold the wire." Caleb walked toward her slowly at first, then faster. He didn't stop at a polite distance this time. He closed the gap, crashing into her, wrapping his arms around her waist and lifting her off the ground. Elara buried her face in his neck, smelling the sweat and the sun and the earth. "You came back," he murmured into her hair, his voice thick with emotion. "You actually came back." "I couldn't hear myself think in the city," she said, pulling back to look at him. It was too loud. "I missed the silence. I missed you." Caleb's eyes searched hers, intense and vulnerable. "It hasn't been silent here," he admitted. "It's been the loudest quiet I've ever known. Every shadow looked like you." They didn't kiss, not yet. They just held each other, the fence forgotten, the cattle grazing nearby, indifferent to the reunion. But the reality was still there. Elara had a firm in Chicago. Caleb had a ranch in Wyoming. "I can't stay forever," she said, the words tasting like ash. "I have a contract to finish, but I can come back. Weekends, holidays. I can work remotely part of the time." It was a compromise, a way to bridge the two worlds. Caleb looked at the mountains, then back at her. "It's a long drive, Elara. It's a hard life. I know," she said firmly. "But I'd rather drive 1,000 miles to see you than sit across the table from anyone else." And so began the secret return. The double life. For months, Elara existed in 2 states. Monday through Thursday, she was the sharp-edged architect in heels. Friday through Sunday, she was the rancher's love in denim. She would arrive exhausted and the ranch would heal her. They met at the fence line of their 2 worlds, stealing time. But secrets weigh heavy. The travel was grueling. The separation on Sunday nights grew more painful each time. It felt like tearing a wound open repeatedly. Caleb grew quieter on Sundays. Elara grew more tearful. They were surrounding the problem, but they hadn't conquered it. They were trying to have both, and it was breaking them. The breaking point came in late autumn. Elara was in Chicago, presenting the final model for the eco-resort. It was the pinnacle of her career. The room was full of investors. Her phone buzzed. She ignored it. It buzzed again and again. Cold dread washed over her. Caleb never called during the day. Never. She stepped out of the boardroom, her heart pounding. Hello. Elara. It's Miller. The ranger, his voice was tight. There was an accident, Caleb. A bull broke loose. He's in the hospital in Jackson. It's bad. The world stopped. Investors, the model, the applause, it all dissolved into gray noise. I'm coming, she said. Elara, the presentation? Her boss shouted as she ran for the elevator. If you leave now, you're done. Do you hear me? You're done. Elara didn't even slow down. She hit the lobby running. I'm done, she said to the empty air. And she meant it. The flight felt like an eternity. The drive to the hospital was a blur of tears. When she burst into his room, he was awake. Battered, bruised, a cast on his leg and ribs taped up, but awake. Looked small in the hospital bed, stripped of his landscape. You idiot, she sobbed, rushing to his side. Caleb managed a weak smile, reaching out a hand to touch her face. Tell me you didn't speed to get here. I quit, she said, the words spilling out before she could stop them. I quit the firm. I quit Chicago. Not going back. Caleb's brow furrowed. Elara, no, that's your dream. You worked your whole life for that. No, she said, gripping his hand. That was a goal. This ... she gestured between them. This is a dream. A goal is something you achieve. A dream is something you live. I don't want to visit my life on the weekends, Caleb. I want to live it. Here, with you. Caleb looked at her, seeing the resolve in her eyes. The steel that the city had forged in her was now being used to hold them together. It's not an easy life, he warned again, but his grip on her hand tightened. Snow gets deep, money gets tight. I'm an architect. She smiled through her tears. I can design barns. I can renovate lodges. I can build things here. I can't build a life without you. The final scene is quiet. It is 2 years later. The cabin has changed. There is a new wing added to the side, modern but blending perfectly with the log's glass walls that let the mountains in. It is Elara's design. Elara sits on the porch, a drafting pad on her lap. She is sketching a stable for a neighbor. She wears worn boots and a flannel shirt, her hair tied back loosely. The door opens, and Caleb walks out. He moves well, though his leg stiffens when it rains. He holds 2 mugs of coffee. He sits beside her, looking out at the valley. The sun is setting, painting the snow-capped peaks in shades of violet and gold. A toddler stumbles out the door, giggling, chasing a farm dog. Caleb leans down and scoops the child up, settling him on his lap. Storm's coming in, Caleb says, looking at the clouds gathering in the north. Elara looks up from her sketch. She looks at the clouds, then at her husband, then at their son. She doesn't feel fear. She doesn't feel the urge to run. Let it come, she says, leaning her head on Caleb's shoulder. We're already home. The camera pulls back, rising above the cabin, above the smoke curling from the chimney, rising until the ranch is just a speck in the vast, wild, beautiful frontier of Wyoming.